Welcome to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's begin. Dark Gates, the demon within. In the small town of Willington, Michigan, the Smith family had just moved into their new home on the outskirts. It was an old, abandoned house with a peculiar atmosphere, dilapidated with dark windows, resembling a long-forgotten part of town. Lisa, the mother, was initially cautious, but her husband, John, convinced her that it was the perfect place for a fresh start. Their little daughter, Emma, was especially excited about the move. She had always loved adventures, and this was a truly new place to explore. In the first few days, they noticed nothing unusual. But one day, while Lisa was dusting upstairs, little Emma went for a walk in the woods behind the house. She returned with muddy shoes and a strange expression on her face, one Lisa could not forget. Beside her was an old book, clearly not from her collection, and she held it tightly as if it were her most treasured possession. Lisa asked where she had found it, and Emma said it was an old Bible from a cemetery deep in the forest. After that, everything changed. Emma started acting strangely. She was no longer the cheerful, energetic girl her parents knew. At night, when everyone was asleep, she would get out of bed and stand silently in front of the large mirror in the hallway. Lisa couldn't understand why she did it, but one night, when she looked through the window and saw Emma's dark eyes, she felt a deep fear. Emma stood there, motionless, with an eerie expression, and her gaze was not that of a child. It was empty, almost foreign. "What are you doing, Emma?" Lisa asked one evening when she entered her room. But Emma didn't answer. She only slowly turned and looked at her mother with dark eyes. The voice that came from her lips was not her own. It was low and raspy, like that of an old person who had long forgotten the warmth of a human soul. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice carried a deep hatred. Lisa shuddered and tried to lead Emma out of the room, but the girl stood still, like a statue. And then, when Lisa reached out to lift her, something terrifying happened. Emma suddenly grabbed her mother's hand, and her fingers became as cold as ice, as if they had turned to stone. "You shouldn't disturb me," the voice said again, and Lisa felt a paralyzing chill spread through her body. That night, when everyone was asleep, Lisa woke up to a sound. She heard something that made her hair stand on end. A distant scream echoed from the garden, so loud and horrifying that the entire house seemed to tremble. Lisa rushed downstairs to the kitchen and found Emma sitting in the corner, clutching the old book from the cemetery. Her eyes were black as night, and her mouth twisted into a dreadful grin. "Mom, I'll tell you everything," she whispered, her trembling voice blending with deep, guttural sounds. Lisa couldn't understand what was happening. She reached out to put her hands on the girl's shoulders, but suddenly, her heart began to race, and a heavy pressure built in her chest. Her breathing grew labored, and standing became difficult. "She's coming, she's waiting, and she'll take you too," Emma whispered, and her words seemed to freeze the entire room. Lisa grabbed her daughter's hand, determined to put an end to this. She took hold of Emma's shoulders and forced her into bed, gripping her tightly to prevent her from rising. And then, from the darkness beneath the bed, came a sinister laugh. It was not the laugh of a child. It held no joy, no warmth. Lisa scooped Emma into her arms and ran to the door, but standing before her was a dark figure. Tall, shadowy, with a face that seemed not of this world. "You won't take her," Lisa screamed. But the figure only smiled, and its grin was so horrifying that Lisa felt as if her heart would leap from her chest. She backed away, feeling a cold hand grasp her. And in that moment, just as it seemed there was no way out, the doorbell rang, shattering the dreadful silence. The doorbell was so unexpected that Lisa couldn't believe her ears at first. She stood in the darkness, holding Emma tightly, her heart pounding, a crushing weight pressing on her chest like never before. She knew she couldn't just open the door. What if it was another one of those demons, the ones already trying to take her child? But the ringing persisted again and again, and strangely, Lisa felt an inexplicable urge to open the door. She gently laid Emma on the bed, knelt before her and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Everything will be all right." But even in her own words, Lisa could hear the emptiness, like a voice lost in a cold fog. As she approached the door, her hands trembled. She couldn't understand why she feared this moment so much. There was no reason to. Yet her intuition screamed that salvation did not lie beyond that door. She grasped the doorknob, and at that moment, a terrible pounding erupted, as if some unseen force was trying to open it itself. A surge of terror crashed over Lisa, making her kidneys ache and her heart feel as if it would leap from her chest. When she finally opened the door, she saw only an empty hallway. Dim and cold, with cracked walls and old paintings that seemed to stare at her in horror. But just as she exhaled in relief, she heard whispering. A whisper that seemed to come from the very heart of her home. At first, she couldn't tell who, or what, it was. But then, she felt something cold brush against her skin, as if an invisible finger traced her neck. "Don't touch them. They are yours. They will take you." The whisper spoke in a language Lisa didn't recognize, yet it gripped her heart with pure terror. She spun around, but nothing was there. Only the darkness in the hallway seemed to shift, something deep within it moving, retreating into the depths of the house. "Emma!" Lisa cried, rushing back to her daughter's room. But as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she felt it. Everything around her was growing colder, heavier, like a thick mist swallowing her whole. The only thing she could hear was the deep, eerie voice resonating from every corner. "You won't escape. She is already yours." Emma's room was dark. Lisa flicked on the light, and for a brief moment, everything seemed normal. Her daughter was asleep. But as she stepped closer to the bed, Lisa realized Emma was not on it. She was on the floor, huddled in the corner, pressed against the wall. And then, the worst happened. Lisa rushed to her, but as Emma lifted her head, Lisa froze. Her daughter's eyes were black. Completely black, without whites, as if all humanity had been drained from them. And the voice that came from her lips was not hers. It was deep, ancient, something far stronger than any human being. "Mom, don't touch me. I'm not your daughter anymore. She's inside me. She wants you. And she will take you." Lisa stumbled backward, her heart pounding so hard that the world around her spun. She couldn't speak. The girl in front of her was no longer her child. "I will be with you forever. Forever." Emma screamed, her voice twisting into a horrendous shriek, a sound like the howling wind scraping against old, forgotten graves. Lisa clutched her head in agony as a suffocating darkness wrapped around her soul. She watched in horror as a shadow began to rise from Emma's body, a swirling mass of black smoke, growing, expanding, taking form. The walls around them cracked, as if the house itself was breaking apart. Each step became heavier, each breath harder. And then, from the depths of the nightmare, that voice returned. "You won't escape. She is yours now." The shadow, now towering over Lisa, lunged at her, and in that moment, an icy force pierced through her bones. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. And as the foul, suffocating air surrounded her, Lisa realized the horrifying truth. This was no longer her daughter. This was something else. And it had come to take everything that belonged to it. Lisa felt the ground beneath her feet begin to tremble. Her heart pounded so violently that it seemed as if it would rip out of her chest and fall to the floor. The dark shadow that had risen from Emma slid toward her like an invisible current, wrapping around her body with a cold, foul force that seemed to devour all light. Lisa tried to scream, but her throat was clenched tight as if unseen hands were choking her. "She is not yours. She is already mine." The voice that echoed from the darkness was both quiet and terrifying, like a whisper in the blackest of nights. Lisa struggled to break free, but her arms and legs felt heavy, as if they were made of metal. She couldn't move. And then, right before her eyes, a figure appeared. Black, hunched over, with long, thin fingers like thorns, it slowly approached. Every step it took sounded like the cracking of an old grave splitting open in the wind. "I have been waiting for you for a long time." The voice was familiar now. It was the same shadow that had filled her home. The same shadow that had possessed her daughter. Lisa couldn't comprehend what was happening. This couldn't be real. She couldn't let it happen. She raised her hand, searching for anything to protect herself, but all she saw was the dark figure moving closer and closer, like a predator stalking its prey. "Leave my child alone," Lisa screamed, her voice sounding as if it came from the depths of a grave. But the laughter that answered her was even more chilling. "It's too late. She is no longer yours. She is mine," the shadow whispered, and its face began to merge with Emma's. Shadows and light intertwined, making it impossible to tell where one being ended and the other began. Lisa couldn't hold on. Her strength was leaving her. Her mind was slipping into darkness. She felt herself sinking into the abyss, and the only sound she could hear was the laughter consuming her. At that moment, she remembered the cemetery Emma had visited. She recalled the old book, the ancient Bible, she had brought back with her. The book was the key. She could feel it. And if there was any chance to save her daughter, it was through that book. But where was it? Where was it now? Her eyes fell on Emma, or rather, on the dark entity that had taken her place. The distance between them was shrinking, and Lisa knew. She had to act now, or she would lose her forever. Shadows had nearly swallowed the entire room. Lisa grabbed the old book that lay on the floor beside the bed and frantically flipped through its pages, tearing them in fear and haste. Strange words, written in languages she had never seen before, glowed with a dark light. Lisa didn't understand their meaning, but she knew one thing. Her child was under the control of this unholy force, and she had to stop it. Suddenly, the book began to glow. A dark vortex erupted from its pages, and Lisa felt a powerful force throw her backward, as if a massive wave had tossed her out of the room. The dark figure froze for a moment, writhing in pain as the book's power struck it. It screamed, a terrible ear-splitting wail, as its face twisted into something inhuman. Its skin cracked like old wood, and its eyes burned with a crimson glow. Its arms stretched forward, but Lisa, clutching the book, continued reading the ancient words spilling from her lips. Then, everything stopped. The shadows dissolved, and the entity that had been Emma returned to its original form. But instead of relief, Lisa saw panic on her daughter's face. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice once again her own. But Lisa knew this was temporary. The darkness had retreated. Lisa held the book tightly, and though the demon had been repelled, she knew this wasn't the end. This was just one battle, but the war was far from over. "Mom, why?" Emma asked, her voice calm once more, but Lisa could see it in her daughter's eyes. Something had changed. There was a fear in them, a fear that only now began to understand what she had narrowly escaped. And then Lisa realized, the book wasn't just the solution. This connection to the dark world had left a mark on her daughter, and now they would have to find a way to close this portal once and for all. But it wouldn't be easy. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She sat next to Emma's bed, holding the book wrapped in dark fabric as if afraid it would start glowing again and lead to even greater disaster. In the darkness of the room, only the faint light from the nightlight cast a glow on her daughter's sleeping face. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that even in her sleep, Emma wasn't fully herself. Was this truly her daughter? Or was it merely a shell inhabited by another entity, waiting for the moment to take over her once again? Lisa knew that this demonic connection had remained. And it would stay. The book couldn't be the final solution. It had only opened a portal. And this portal was alive. It continued to stretch across time and space, waiting for the moment it would reclaim what belonged to it. All Lisa could do was fight, even if it meant battling to the very end. In the morning, Lisa began studying the old book. Each step she took brought her closer to a truth that terrified her to her core. The strips of leather that turned the pages contained dreadful words that bore dark magic. These words couldn't be uttered without consequence. Each chapter in the book seemed like instructions for a demon eager to invade this world once more. But one page caught her attention. It had a drawing, an illustration of a cemetery, the same one she had seen near their home. Lisa recalled how her daughter had spoken about this cemetery, the place where she had found the book. This place held some supernatural significance. And now, Lisa realized that she had to return there. This time, she couldn't afford to be weak. Summoning all her courage, Lisa set out with Emma to the cemetery. They didn't speak, walking in silence. The road they took was so quiet that each step echoed in the stillness, as if the very earth was refusing to be a part of this world. Lisa felt the shadows of the trees and bushes growing larger, as though they were watching her every move. Arriving at the cemetery, Lisa stopped near the old fence. She felt the darkness around her thicken, and the air grew colder. Emma, holding her hand, looked at her with dark eyes, and her strange smile began to return. "You have to go alone," said the voice that no longer belonged to Emma. Lisa felt the dark force pulling her forward. She had to pass through this place, through everything that had been left in the shadows of this forgotten cemetery. And there she saw it, the old grave from which black smoke poured, filling the air. Lisa had no choice. She took a few steps and reached down to the earth, digging into the old grave. The sensation she felt with each movement was indescribable. Her hands, filled with cold and despair, slid over the ground that felt alive, absorbing all the fear she had. And then, from the grave, he emerged, the same demon Lisa had seen before. His black eyes burned, and he stood before her, seeming as if he was part of the darkest nightmare. "You couldn't stop this. She is mine," he spoke, his voice echoing like the sound of 1,000 petrified human bodies. Lisa felt her heart constrict in her chest, and her legs gave way. She wanted to flee, but couldn't. Instead, she remembered what she had read in the book. Those terrible words. And though they could lead to death, they were also her last chance. "Leave her," Lisa shouted, recalling every word that seemed to hold the power to stop this shadow. Suddenly, everything froze. The dark demon raised his head, and the sky above them began to darken. The wind swirled, and Lisa saw black energy erupt from the grave, filling the air around them. The darkness expanded. And then, when all of Lisa's thoughts were nearly consumed by fear, she felt the warmth of her daughter's presence begin to seep back into her hand. And that was her final moment of resistance. "I will take you," Lisa whispered, and in her hands, still clutching the book, light flashed, beginning to destroy the darkness that had been with them for so long. But this was not the end. The darkness that enveloped Lisa and Emma began to recede. At the last cry, Lisa felt the power of the book and the dark vortex collide, and inside her, it felt like the universe itself was tearing apart with fear and tension. Everything around them began to change. The earth beneath their feet started pulsing, as if alive, and there was the sensation that the very space between them and the cemetery was ripping apart, like a taut string about to snap. Lisa couldn't stop. She felt the demon in front of her wildly lunge to the side, trying to break free from the light-wrapped space. His torn face was no longer human, just a kind of shadow, something from distant nightmares. But at that moment, Lisa realized that her daughter was still too close for the demon to reclaim her. Her soul had one desire, to save her child. She poured all her strength into it, desperately holding the book, and began to chant the incantations again. Suddenly, everything opened. The grave, which seemed petrified, cracked open, releasing fiery flashes and swirling dark smoke. The book in Lisa's hands exploded with light, and the flash covered everything around them. The demon howled again, but his cry was different now. Not pitiful, but more like the scream of something ancient and old, losing its last moments of life. Lisa felt her eyes twitch with pain, but she couldn't stop the spell. The dark figure fell to the ground, only to rise again, cloaked in black wings. Lisa felt her legs give way once more, the force pulling her into the abyss. She could barely breathe. "You won't defeat me," the demon roared, his voice echoing off every grave in the cemetery. He lunged at Lisa, but all he had was emptiness, emptiness that shattered beneath her feet. And then she saw it. A small flash of light, a tiny image of Emma reaching out to her. Lisa stretched out her hand, and in that instant, all the darkness around them shattered like a cracked glass ball. "Mom," Emma whispered softly, and Lisa saw that her daughter was no longer bound by the dark threads that had pulled her into hell. She was her daughter again, just as she had been the last time Lisa held her in her arms. Lisa dropped to her knees, feeling her chest fill with relief. She embraced Emma, and in that moment, everything fell silent. Only the wind, howling around them, mingled with the old voices that had once sealed this cemetery off from the world. But Lisa knew this was just the beginning. They had defeated the demons on this earth, but the dark force was relentless. The book remained in her hands. And she knew, as long as it wasn't destroyed, as long as this portal wasn't fully closed, all of this could return. Again and again. As they left the cemetery, the sky began to clear, but Lisa felt that an unknown shadow remained in her soul. They had survived, but they didn't know how long the peace would last. For with the darkness they had felt, there could be no final battle. Now, Lisa understood that there were more questions she would have to search for answers to. And even as they walked toward home, Lisa knew, nothing would leave them in peace. The demonic possession had become a part of their lives. And the only clear thought she had was this: even if her daughter was now freed from this nightmare, the fight was not over. Because they hadn't yet seen all the demons that this book had awakened. Several days after Lisa and Emma left the cemetery, everything seemed normal. But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible and sinister, like a dark skyscraper, loomed over them, watching. During the past nights, she had heard strange sounds echoing from the dark corners of the house. Rustling, as if someone were walking through the corridors, quiet thumps against the walls. Lisa tried to convince herself it was just her nerves, but each time she felt the cold wind brushing against her skin, as though an unclean force was seeping through the walls. One evening, as she was about to go to bed, Lisa heard a voice. At first, it was a whisper, so faint it seemed like an illusion, but with each passing moment, it grew louder. It was her daughter's voice, but mixed with something horrific, dark. "Mom," Emma whispered, but her voice sounded with such a terrible, cold distance that Lisa shuddered. When she turned, she saw a shadow standing on her daughter's bed. This was not Emma, it was the demon that had taken her form, and now it was once again coming to claim her soul. "She's mine," the voice said, deeper than ever before. It wasn't just dark, it was loud, filled with despair, demanding that Lisa give Emma to it. This wasn't the child Lisa loved. It was an empty, soulless false spirit. Lisa couldn't even scream. Her heart was heavy with terror. She grabbed the book and began searching for more spells, not realizing that she was falling into the trap once again. All her attempts to speak the words from the book only stirred up the demons she had tried to stop. She no longer had the strength. She wasn't prepared for this. Lisa felt her will weakening under the weight of the evil. "You can't stop me. This is your mistake." The same voice filled the room again, and with each word, the cold in her body became more pronounced. Realizing she could no longer fight, Lisa ran to the basement where they had once hidden old things. She remembered there was an old talisman, an amulet her mother had given her in childhood, supposedly for protection against evil. Lisa tried to remember the words her mother had spoken when she handed her the amulet, but she couldn't. Holding the amulet in her hands, she felt its cold surface become warm, and then, the same whispering returned. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, this time with such force that Lisa felt her soul tear apart. But this time, it was closer. She didn't have much time. And then, when everything seemed hopeless, Lisa remembered one thing. The book said that true control over dark forces could only be achieved when they themselves acknowledged their defeat. All these monsters that tried to inhabit her daughter had their weaknesses. And the only way to defeat them was to return that control to them. She closed her eyes, tightly holding the amulet, and spoke the words that seemed like they should never be uttered. "I accept you into me. I'm not afraid of you. Leave my daughter and fear what I can do." The amulet burst into bright light, and Lisa felt her body fill with a strange power, dark but alive. She opened her eyes, and it was not her reflection in the mirror, but the face of the same demon, now standing in her body. Lisa knew. This was her final battle. "Mom." Emma's voice was heard, and this time it was pure, real, but frightened. "Don't be afraid, I'll take you out of here," Lisa said through the dark voice speaking for her. She felt the force controlling her begin to weaken, but she needed more time to finish this. At the moment when everything cracked, when the darkness around them ripped apart, Lisa threw off the demonic influence and forced the power to leave her. And though everything shattered, she understood that this fight was only the beginning. And even though the demon had left them this time, she felt that they would never forget the fear that still hid in the darkness. They were alive, but now they knew. The fight for their souls was far from over. After Lisa saved her daughter again, the days became long and difficult. While everything seemed to calm down, an unmistakable anxiety remained inside Lisa. She tried to return to her normal life, as before, but every time she looked at her daughter, Emma seemed different. There was something in her eyes. It wasn't the same as before. They had become deep and dark, as though hiding a secret that Lisa couldn't yet understand. One evening, when Lisa was sitting in the kitchen, sipping her cold coffee, she felt the room start to darken. The air grew heavy, and the musty smell that filled the house was so strong that Lisa shuddered. She looked up, and for a moment, her heart stopped. Emma was standing in the doorway, staring directly at her. But again, she was not the same girl she had known. Her gaze was empty, and a dark shadow seemed to hover around her. "Mom, I can't keep this inside anymore." Her voice was barely audible, but there was a terrible disgust in it. Lisa felt a cold hand of fear tightening around her chest. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Lisa could barely force the words out. Her voice was tense. "It's not me. I'm not me anymore. This isn't my body. And he'll come again. He won't let us go until I belong to him." Emma spoke, and her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded like something else, something that belonged to a world where there was no place for humans. In that moment, Lisa felt the ground beneath her start to sway again, just like that night at the cemetery. Her heart trembled with fear. Lisa realized that what had happened to her daughter was only part of a larger, darker game. The demon was coming back, and now it was stronger than ever. "You can't escape him, Lisa." Emma spoke again, and this was not her voice. It was the same dark voice that Lisa had heard before when the book had opened the portal to another world. "You think you've won? He won't leave us in peace. It doesn't matter how many times you close these gates. He'll find a way," the voice continued, and Lisa felt something inside her begin to tear apart. "I won't give up. I will protect you," Lisa shouted, though she knew that every word she said sounded less convincing. Emma silently turned back into the room, but Lisa felt something wrap around her again. It was the cold that pierced her soul. She knew she would have to search for answers in the book again. But this book was no longer just a tool. It was something much darker, something that had been pulling Lisa and her daughter into its jaws. She would have to find a new way to stop it all before it was too late. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She sat before the old book, examining every page, every symbol that seemed familiar. And on one of the last pages, which she hadn't noticed before, there was something written that shocked her to the core. "Only when blood is shed, the dark path will close forever." What could this mean? What was Lisa supposed to do? Shed blood? She couldn't believe it. This meant that in order to stop the demons, she would have to make a terrible sacrifice. And what was worse, her own daughter might be the one to pay the price. Lisa's heart sank. She couldn't accept this. But she knew her choices were limited. If she didn't act, the dark force that ruled would take Emma for good. And Lisa couldn't let that happen. The desperate struggle with the dark forces had turned into fear, and fear into despair. Lisa tried to gather all her strength to find a solution, but her mind was engulfed in darkness. And even when she turned to her daughter, she felt her slipping further away, as if emptiness was swallowing her whole. "What are you willing to do, Lisa?" A voice echoed in her head, a voice that seemed all too familiar. The shadows around them thickened, and Lisa knew she had to act. But how? Lisa could no longer remain silent. Everything she had seen and felt had long ceased to be just terrible dreams or illusions. This was real evil, gripping her soul, and she could no longer run away from it. The feeling that darkness was closing in from all sides, mercilessly engulfing her and Emma, would not let her rest. Lisa knew. There was no avoiding this final battle. They were standing on the edge, and each step she took could be her last. For several nights, Lisa had heard Emma whispering foreign words in her sleep, voices that were unheard by Lisa's ears. They were unlike ordinary nightmares. This was something else, something ancient and sinister, like an echo reverberating across the infinite span of time. One day, when Lisa entered Emma's room, she saw something that made her heart stop. The girl was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide open, but she wasn't moving. Lisa lifted her hands, which bore marks, wounds that seemed long healed but were now starting to bleed again. This wasn't a normal wound, it was a wound glowing with dark purple light, pierced with black energy that couldn't be explained. "Mom!" Emma spoke softly, barely audible. Her voice was completely different. "He's coming. He will take us. We can't escape." Lisa felt the weight of a 600-kilogram burden sink into her heart. She grabbed her daughter in her arms but could no longer ignore the cold that was seeping through her skin. This wasn't just the usual chill of the night. It was something that penetrated her bones, gripping every cell in her body. And this cold had no end. Emma raised her head, and in her eyes, Lisa saw only emptiness. Something very old, dark, and devoid of any human essence. This was not her daughter. This was the demon that had claimed her body, slowly and relentlessly draining the life from her. "He's coming now, and we won't be able to stop him. He'll be with us forever until we make a sacrifice. You know what he wants, Mom. You know who he needs." The words sounded like an order, but there was no humanity in the voice. It was merely a dark shadow speaking through a child's voice. Lisa looked around in despair. She was out of options. All her previous attempts had been in vain. The book had clearly stated that the demon who had taken her daughter would never let her go until he received what he wanted. And he wouldn't back down. In that moment, Lisa realized that the only way to stop this nightmare was to offer her own child as a sacrifice. She would have to give her soul, her blood. But she knew this blood would not only be spilled on her conscience, but also on the back of her daughter standing before her. Lisa fell to her knees, her heart torn with pain and despair. She understood that she had to make this choice to stop him. She would either save Emma, or lose her forever. There, in the unbearable silence of the night, Lisa spoke the final words, which were a farewell. "I will give everything I have, just to stop you. Just take this nightmare from my daughter." And then, everything went dark. Darkness filled the room, completely consuming everything around them. Lisa felt her body becoming foreign, as though she were losing herself. She could no longer control her movements. Suddenly, the entire house began to shake. Windows exploded, doors slammed shut with deafening sounds. Streams of dark energy rose from beneath the earth, closing Lisa in an unrelenting darkness. She saw shadows emerge from the dark, resembling ancient demons. They slowly approached her, their eyes burning with red light, and sounds erupted from their mouths, comparable only to the cries of lost souls. "Now you understand." A voice echoed in her head. "Now you see everything." And in that moment, as Lisa felt her consciousness begin to melt away, her body turning hollow, one thought appeared before her eyes. The dark force hadn't just taken her daughter. It had come for them all, and they would never escape. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows, they are always near. Until next time.